Hello. For this vlog, I wanted to go into a topic I alluded to briefly in my previous one, which was the legal risks of contacts from a donor, and going along with that, the issue of contracts. So first, let's start with the contract side of things. I recommend all recipients get contracts. It is true, as many may already know, that contracts are not always legally binding. How binding they are depends on the state. Some states already have precedents which say that contracts are not binding. Some states state that they are binding, and the vast majority of states have no ruling one way or another, meaning that it is impossible to say whether or not a contract will be found legally binding. I will be including a link to KDR, which has a very nice list of states and precedents that have already been set. These are not legal. Neither I nor KDR are lawyers. Do not take this as legal advice. Do not sue us if it's wrong. But it's a good rule of thumb. It gives you some good information about the current state of the various states and their rules. But in general, for the majority of states, it's unknown whether or not a contract will provide legal protection by itself. However, it does no harm to get one, so I strongly encourage all recipients to get contracts. I will be including currently a link to contracts on KDR that I recommend. I personally have a contract that I really like that has an added section which has the partner agreeing to take on all the legal rights and responsibilities that the biologic father would traditionally have. I'm going to try to get that contract put up somewhere so that I can link to it, and will eventually update my link to my contract once I get it posted. But it's always good to have contracts, but realize that they are not always going to work. Some donors would try to claim that contracts are not good options or are detrimental. They claim that they prove that you used a donor and therefore weaken your case, and that's just not true. For a recipient, contracts can only provide protection. If a donor wants to prove that he's the biological father, he can always compel you to have a paternity test done, and you can do the same. So the claim that contracts somehow prove that you used a donor and weaken your protection is a complete fabrication. The reason that some donors have tried to claim that is they don't want to sign a contract, because on the donor side of things it's a little bit more dangerous. To sign a contract, donors usually expect to give their full name, and certain donors are unwilling to provide their full name and therefore don't want to sign a contract. As I already said, don't use a donor who does not provide his full name. If you do not have STD tests with the name he's given you on them, just don't use them. So presumably you won't have any donors trying to avoid filling out contracts because your donor ideally has already showed your name. But always get contracts. However, I wanted to address the more important concern that some recipients have, which is that contracts are not always legally binding. How binding they are depends on state. So first, I should mention, if you have a donor in a contract, it's important that you do not allow the donor to call himself the father. You can have him visit the child, or you can even explain that he is the donor, but the donor should never use the word father. If he starts calling himself the father, he is far more likely to be considered the father. Many states have enacted the so-called Uniform Parenting Act, which says that if a male has played the role of a father for a sufficiently long time, he's considered the father, no matter what, even if he's not the biological father. So it's okay to have the child know the donor, but make sure that the word father isn't used. But to address the concern that women have that a donor is going to show up and try first contact, it actually doesn't really happen. It's extremely rare for any donor to try first contact if the donor has had more than 1 to 2 successes. Brand new donors, first time donors, there's a little bit more of a risk. But once the donor's had even a few successes, it's almost unheard of for the donor to try first contact. Why is that? Well, there's actually a number of factors. First of all, most obvious, if a donor ever tries a first contact with the child, they end up paying child support. And that's a fairly significant financial incentive not to try to get contact with the child. In addition, forgive my cynicism, the vast majority of donors don't want contact. A lot of donors are anonymous. A lot of donors simply want to donate and disappear. Only a small minority of donors would ever even be interested in contact. Some are, but there's no reason to be concerned about a donor who doesn't have uncle, friend, or co-parenting listed as a desired relationship with the child, because they pretty much never try for contact. The vast majority of donors just have no interest. But even donors who do desire contact, once they've had a few successes, it's almost unheard of for them to first contact, because they already have children out there. A lot of women want contact. If it's very important for a donor to have contact, he probably already has children he can visit and he can spend time with, because the recipients welcome and encourage it. So there's not much incentive to fight you to first contact, when it's also going to cost him to pay child support to visit one child, when he can go out and visit another child and have the mother welcome him and no risk of child support. And generally, the more that donors donate, the less emotionally attached they get to each individual child. That varies from donor, but that generally is true. So once the donor's had a few successes, there's really no reason to fight for contact with your child. In addition, if a donor is going to become emotionally attached to a child, they usually realize that after the first success and don't donate anymore because it became too emotionally difficult. And even if a donor would try to first contact, one of the beauties of sites like Known Donor Registry, which I highly recommend for finding donors, I think it's the best site out there, is there's a lot of resources to get feedback on a donor, and any donor who's trying to first contact will be discussed on KDR and will be very well known, and you can easily protect yourself. The point is, it is almost unheard of to first contact. In fact, in all my time on KDR, many years, advising many women, and I can tell you so many stories, you have no idea. I've done a lot of advice, a lot of talking to women, hearing lots of feedback. There has been exactly one situation where a donor with more than 2 successes from a site like KDR has tried to first contact. Only one that I know of. And that donor, well, I personally believe that donor is a sociopath who was doing it to harass women, but it was very obvious he was a horrible donor. Everyone on KDR, every recipient knew it, and if anyone had asked any recipient, they would have been underway. He's banned from the site. He's a bad donor, quickly banned. There were significant warning signs, and I mean significant. Within 15 minutes of speaking to this person, I knew he was not a good person. So while I feel sorry for that situation happening to the women that it happened to, anyone who is reading these blogs, or listening to this vlog, anyone who's read my blogs, anyone who is actually putting in any effort in screening donors is not going to get someone that bad. And that's the only case. One example out of hundreds of women I've spoken to, situations I've heard of, that's an extremely small number. And even that with one individual, there were major warning signs that he was a bad person. I admit his first in contact was not one of the things I would have anticipated, but it was very clear that he was not anyone I would have ever recommended. I recommended women avoid him. So it's actually almost unheard of for a donor to first contact. Now, you should still get all the protection you can. You should still have a contract. But I see occasionally women are a little too concerned. I see women actually occasionally afraid to use donors who ask for information about them or the child before donating to decide whether or not to donate, or who state that they would like to have contact with a child at some point. These aren't necessarily bad donors. In fact, donors who ask questions are good donors. I generally really like any donor who asks questions. I think it's a very good sign that donor would not just donate to anyone. And donors who want contact with the child, yeah, they can still be bad donors, but generally they tend to be a little less prone to the truly evil behaviors or the really questionable behaviors. They might be genetically not good options, but they generally tend to care more about the well-being of the mother and child, at least. So I would not exclude a donor simply because he desires contact with a child, so long as you speak with him. He says yes, he understands that you don't want contact, and he verifies that he will not first contact, and he signs the contract accordingly. In cases like that, unless you've seen warning signs, he gets a little too emotional. He tries to pressure you to change your mind. Unless you see very glaring warning signs, it's generally okay to use donors, even if they state that they would desire contact, so long as you've made it clear that you don't want contact and they have affirmed that they understand that and agree with it. Because it's very unheard of for even donors who desire contact with the child to try to force it. In fact, it's pretty much completely unheard of. There's some other things you can do if you really want extra legal protections. One is to do a donation using a doctor, meaning IUI, IVF, or even directed donation if you do a donation at home, which I discussed briefly in one of my other vlogs. All of these processes give you complete and utter legal protection. The donor has no right for contact, visitation, or any of that. They're all more expensive options. Most women don't go that route, and I honestly don't advise going those routes for legal protection. I think that direct donation is good for the ability to choose any donor, but because the actual odds of you needing legal protection is very small, I wouldn't pay extra just to get the protection. But if you need those, if it's very important to you, there are avenues to pursue to reach that. So I guess that's most of what I wanted to say. I just wanted to reassure women because some are very concerned about this. I want to make sure women don't necessarily avoid donors. I will say if contact is an important thing, it's very important to sit down and speak with the donor about these details clearly from the get-go. Whatever you do, don't say something along the lines of, oh yeah, we can discuss that later, if you really don't mean it, because that's not really fair to the donor. But take basic protections, be careful. Of course, screen a donor. You should have a donor who's very trustworthy. If you trust the donor enough to allow him to donate for your child, you should have enough trust with them that you trust he'll keep his word. Anyways, I guess that's really all I wanted to say. Just maybe address the concerns of some women and point them to the blog or the contracts, which you should always have. So I guess that's it for now. Good luck with your donor hunt. Bye.